This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Well, Mike, let's crack on with you, my dear man. I haven't seen you. I think the last time I saw you in the real world in anger, we were sat down watching an open air cinema about 10 years ago, and I don't even remember where we were. So I haven't seen you in real money in a long time. But A, how have you been? And B, tell us about what you're up to and what's been going on, because it's all changing your world, huh?
Unfortunately, TechCrunch Europe's team came to an end as a process of the sale from Yahoo to a private equity company in the US. And TechCrunch Europe's team were all made redundant as a part of that process, as I might have mentioned on LinkedIn at one point. And and since then, well, I just thought, well, it was just before the summer. So I thought, well, might as well take the summer off. But in the meantime, I've been rattling it around at a few tech events and conferences and, just sort of dabbling, really, kind of playing around with social media, doing some videos, doing some posts on social feeds like LinkedIn, of course, and others. Just taking a step back rather than jumping straight back into something immediately.
For those that don't know you, I dare say there is nobody listening that doesn't know of you, because basically anything that has tech in it has Mike in it in some way, shape or form. But you've been around since the UK and the European scene were kind of in baby steps. So you've seen the growing up of the European ecosystem and the UK startup ecosystem. Give us a bit of the kind of the show reel. Give us your highlights, your lowlights of that early TechCrunch years and your early TechFugees and your early Europas. Give us the potted highlights and lowlights.
I basically started as a tech journalist in 1995 and worked on a magazine in the in dot-com boom, and then fast forward to the sort of early 2010s or aughts, I suppose you call it, and I was writing the aughties. I was writing about, obviously Web 2.0 became a thing, and I started writing for the FT and the Guardian about that. And then I was contemplating starting my own, blog, as it were, back in the day, and found out about TechCrunch. And the short version, I guess, is that I started freelancing for them, and a year later, in 2007, and a year later, I was basically effectively a European correspondent. And from there, we built out a team at TechCrunch. It was a fantastic era. And obviously, we've all seen that, the ecosystem in Europe grow as much as fast as the US in many ways, certainly in its own way. During that time, I suppose you mentioned some other things I've done, which is I've realized, I suppose, coming from a British trade magazine, I knew that people like to party. So we did the Europas Awards, and I turned that into a top 100 last year. And I also, during the refugee crisis 2015, I did a non-profit, which I'm in the process of relaunching, called TechFugees, which was about uniting the innovative industry of the tech industry, of course, and humanitarian industry. So I've been sort of spinning those plates while I've been at TechCrunch, writing about startups and chatting to VCs like you guys. And here we are.
One of the things that struck me, so I'm just back from California, and we may chat more about that, but I've met a lot of the new media creators over there. And I suppose sort of 20 years ago, it was all about blogs, and sort of TechCrunch and other blogs, they were the new media. And today it seems that it's shifted. It's Mr. Beast, it's Barry Weiss, it's Cleo Abram that are creating amazing kind of new media platforms. And so it seems to me that just in the way that blogs disrupt the traditional media, now these kind of new creators are disrupting the blogs. How do you see that play out in Europe, and where are the gaps and where are the opportunities from your perspective?
Well, certainly from a media perspective, I think the traditional media industry is grappling with the idea that the individual has gradually started to encroach on a brand. In a way that as a journalist, you were just written by the FT or the Guardian or TechCrunch or whatever. These individuals on social media have become such huge stars that it's a way that people interpret media that way, through individuals. And if you've seen that Bloomberg and others have started to actually put out social media with their journalists kind of front and center, trying to tell the story with video or whatever it is to the audience. Certainly TechCrunch did part of that. I've been playing around with some of that ideas myself as well. The way that people consume media now is very much through social. It's not through RSS feeds anymore, that's for sure. It's a real flip around. Media brands are grappling with it, grappling with the business models, the rise of AI as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly. In a way, it does remind me a little bit of that early blog era, which was really the start of social media. Blogging was social media, basically. And people were used to ping each other's blogs as if they were kind of, retweets almost. There was all sorts of blog platforms, some of which had long since passed away. So it does, I think, in a way, 2025, especially with the economy where it is as well, it's almost does remind me, it has echoes of that era.
So Mike, you've had a ringside seat to European tech and venture, like pretty much ab initio. What would you say on reflection, and now that you've had a bit of time off this summer, for example, just reflecting, how has it performed relative to your expectations? If you were chatting to Mike in 2000, has it, exceeded expectations? Is it about par, or is it undershot so far? How do you think? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that we expect too much in a way of a disparate, fragmented European ecosystem. It's not like we can drive up the 101 highway from Palo Alto to, the Mission District. It's not the same. And, although we're all more or less an hour and a half away from each other on an EasyJet flight or whatever, remains a barrier. I remember when I started TechCrunch, I had a huge kind of overblown ideas at thinking, this is it. This is gonna go nuts, and everybody's gonna come. Kumbaya. Everyone's gonna come together, and it's gonna be absolutely massive. And less than a year in, I just thought this is gonna be tough to basically pull this ecosystem together. People in Serbia, people in Paris, the whole scene is just so fragmented. I think having said that, though, obviously we've got some marquee conferences which are still going, like Web Summit, Viva Tech in Paris, Slush, of course, which has become kind of quite a real pillar, I think, in the ecosystem. London Tech Week bumbles along, yay, in a funny sort of way. But I think that certainly, if you think, look at this podcast, for instance. I think this is a real good signal, actually, that there's a conversation to be had. I think if we was to look at the kind of things that the EU Inc. guys, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, are doing at the moment, that's sort of creating a kind of a vibe, I guess. And I think that the Silicon Valley vibe has a vibe, definitely. And I think we're getting our own vibe, and it's a different flavor, it's a different character. It involves different people. But I definitely think we're there, 15, 18 years on.
Well, I think I have the dubious honor of being possibly the first startup to pitch Mike Butcher's very first event, like back in, 2006, 7 or something, Mike?
1973 it was. Everything was in sepia with handlebar moustaches.
It was a new media age event, wasn't it? Wasn't it your first tech event?
You pitched an event with Jason Calacanis, I think.
He did. He was on the panel. He said he said my startup was shit. I had an argument in the toilet with him about it.
Did you prove him wrong?
I wouldn't go that far. No, it was the right. It was the right thing at the wrong time. So there you go.
We'll go with that.
Who's right?
It was about 10 years too early, basically.
Yeah, Mike, it's been fantastic to Mike's been you've been such a great champion for the European ecosystem, and it's been so much fun to share the journey, all the ups and downs. What do you think the one thing is that hasn't changed that needs to change? Because for me, a lot of the conversations we're having here, like you and I were having almost 20 years ago now, is it, just something structural, like we need more cash, or is it cultural? You talk about that buzz and that vibe and that self, what is it?
We'll always have a different culture, but I think that I would like to see people become a bit more robust and sort of thick-skinned in the way we don't have to basically pussyfoot around certain things. If we say something's not going great, say it. If we think it's great, say it. And I think more often than not, we should say things are good and be, maybe border on the boosterish, that's absolutely fine. Certainly as a journalist, I didn't go around trashing startups like some sort of tabloid reporter. I think what I tried to do was take TechCrunch's sort of DNA about following the journey of the startup and entrepreneurs and giving them, some wind in their sails to see where they would sail and where they would end up. And of course, occasionally you met some bad actors, either on the founder or the investor side, or some bumps in the road. But I think we've definitely got that DNA of promoting the ecosystem, promoting startups. But I would also like to say, let's get real as well. Let's call things out that we think. Now, what's the strategy about this? Is the guys going to make it, or aren't they? Is Lovable going to be a $1 trillion company, which I saw today that the founder is saying he's going to be? Let's kick the tires on that for real. And
be
I
less
think
British. Is that what you're saying? Be less stiff upper lip. Is that the?
But actually, to kick the tires on it and to criticize it would be very European and very British. Whereas in the States, you'd find that being champion, they're going to be a $1 trillion company, and don't look too closely because you might ruin the spell and they might not become a $1 trillion company.
Nothing wrong with a little bit of both. I just think certainly in the States, I certainly find that entrepreneurs and VCs on stage often have very robust engagements, and then get off stage and slap each other on the back and joke about it in the bar. Everyone in the audience is going, "What the hell just happened?" And I think we could do a lot more of that. I'm not
We've
saying
been trying to do that on this pod, Mike, to be honest.
More arguing. I'm all for it. More arguing.
Good for you.
Mads has just been at the All In Summit in LA, where I'm sure there was some brutality on stage and then some backslapping in the green room. So Mads, give us the skinny on the vibe, the people, the attendees, the guys on stage. How did it all go for you?
Yeah, so but it's my third time there, and I think the guys have pulled together quite a special event. The lineup was incredible, I think, once again. But leave aside sort of people's politics and all of that stuff, but you just had so many of the builders, so many of the people that matter. Elon Musk, you had Demis Hassabis from DeepMind, you had Eric Schmidt, who right now is building rockets to compete with SpaceX. You had Alex Karp from Palantir, Roelof Botha, who was managing Sequoia. Then you also had some of the kind of the big wig CEOs there. So Rene Haas from ARM, you had David Ricks from Eli Lilly, you had Chris Wright, who was the new-ish energy secretary, who had I thought a great debate about kind of should we go nuclear or is it more about renewables, or kind of what makes sense. Brian Johnson was there giving his spiel, which was fun to see live, and some super impressive entrepreneurs like Keller Clifton, who is building Zipline, which is a drone delivery company doing just a ton of fascinating stuff. So it was just super inspirational. I would say it's the only conference I've been to where everybody stays for every talk. Normally you're used to most of the action happens in the corridors and the networking, but here it's really, people really want to hear what all these guys have to say. So I thought that was interesting. And some of the things that were discussed. So Elon talked a lot about a kind of physical AI, what's happening in robotics, where the challenges, and he keeps coming back to it's the hand, sort of the 26 actuators. But also it's not just designing, but also supply chain, that there is just no supply chain for the stuff they're making. So he's got to do vertical integration and build all the stuff that goes into the robots. And it's just fascinating to hear the guy who is actually driving that, talking about it. Demis, he was talking about AGI, saying, look, a lot of people are saying it's 2 years away. It really is not. It's 5 to 10 years. We talked about ringside seats before. He's obviously pretty close to the action there. I thought Eric Schmidt had some really interesting observations on the US-China AI race, where he says the US is so focused on chasing AGI, and the Chinese basically can't get enough hardware to build the big models. So they're just going all out on real world application. And he's saying they are going to win physical AI, especially in the developed world, because they're just putting models into everything now. And then you had somebody there like Alex Karp from Palantir, who talked about some of the underlying architecture of how they built out their tech, and how some of the stuff that seemed super boring just as the moat, like the way they've done kind of the branching and scaffolding around how they manage data. He said this stuff is so hard to replicate, and that's why they're growing the way they are right now. One of the things many of the speakers spoke about is just what a mess we have made in Europe of the situation. He's like, between energy and immigration and tech regulation, it's just like we've just failed across the board. And he says, listen, Germany's got the best, incredible engineers. France has got the best mathematicians, but Europe is really struggling to take advantage of that. But of course, the flip side of that is there's an opportunity, right? So if we can come together and really start to leverage some of those strengths. So yeah, I thought just lots of insights and lots of inspiration.
Mike, have you been to All In? I mean, you did a lot of American events and stuff, but do you still do them? Have you been to the All In Summit?
No, I haven't, and I partly because it kind of grew up during the pandemic, and then I was obviously doing some other things as well. But I obviously watched their rise, and I think it's very interesting how they've managed to capture a certain conversation in the Valley around them. I would say that it is a certain style rather than the be all and end all of everything you see in the Valley, because I think there are plenty of other voices out there that are just not quite so strident, and maybe sometimes they err on the side of pushing some buttons. It's it's very interesting, and obviously you've got David Sachs in there, who's very much inside the White House. Frankly, I knew Jason Calacanis from back in the day as well, because he was also floating around TechCrunch in the early days as well. So yeah, it's really interesting to see what they've done.
Yeah, I don't know how you disentangle the politics of it, but I know you and Nomads kind of disagree on that. I'm a big softie when it comes to some of their political views, shall we say. But let's draw it back to Europe, because All In Summit in hand, I'm sure it was amazing, but we are all about Europe and the UK and doing magical stuff here. There's a bit of a mixed bag story when we look at the EU. I want to talk a little bit about EU Inc., 28th regime update, what's happening across the European Union and in the UK, because it's the Draghi anniversary. I think it was September the 9th was the year that Mario Draghi came out and said, look, we've got to do something in Europe. We've got to do something about productivity. I know the EU Inc. guys have been on their initiative for a while. And as a reminder, the EU Inc. is all about creating this EU-wide legal entity for startups and effectively turning into almost like a Delaware C Corp, unifying passport to enable startups and the investment community to do more across Europe. Eminently sensible. I don't think anyone argues, but the actual application of it is just really bloody hard. A little bit of context about what's happening with Mario Draghi and what he said and where we're at and where the EU is at. So back in September 24, he set out 383 recommendations, most of which haven't happened. So in the last 12 months, about 40 of his recommendations have been applied, 20% have been dismissed, and the remainder is somewhat in progress. Now, there is a public consultation being driven by the EU Inc. guys. It's at eu-inc.org. If you can support and get the EU to think more about connecting the dots across Europe, I think that would be really helpful and useful. But generally speaking, and Mads, let me go with you first. What has happened in the last year, looking at the report? How is Europe doing? And I'm including the UK in that. Where would you focus?
What's happened is clearly not enough. One of the things we keep coming back to is kind of this need for more investment. And, he's banted about this kind of the 800 billion euro investment price tag, is saying this is what's needed to really help the economy grow. And I think the truth is, capital is necessary, but we need to fix regulatory gridlock first. We can't build, infrastructure or power or housing. If you can't get that done, you're not going to get anything else done. You're just going to pour capital into a broken economy. If it takes 44 months or more to get planning approval for an energy project, well, we can kiss any sort of hope of staying on the AI train goodbye. So I think that's a super important place to start. But then I'd say there is another aspect of this, which is when we talk about the 800 billion euro investment, there's often this notion that it should somehow be government investment and that government should borrow more to invest more. And I think we're missing a trick there. It's much better if it's private investment. And the truth is today, you've got 16 trillion euros or more of pension money, and more than half of that sits in bonds. So although it's long-term investments that should really try to maximize via equity and other productive assets, it's just all yielding 3%. Now, if you shift 25% of that into productive assets, into equities, into alternatives, into infrastructure, you're going to free up 800 billion euros a year. that could come into the economy. So I'd say that the reforms, I would argue, you don't need whatever it was, 274 different measures. I mean, you absolutely need to fix the planning and the permitting so the economy can work again. You need to redefine what prudence means from a pension perspective so that trustees are focused on maximizing long-term returns, not just on minimizing short-term volatility. And then you need to incentivize pension savers to invest in European productive assets and not just bonds and US equities. I think with those three things alone, you're going to unlock so much productivity. So I would start with a simpler thing than a list of hundreds of things that needs to be done.
Mike, do you keep your eye on this stuff? Are you engaged with the EU Inc. guys or anyone around the more European regulatory push?
I'm watching their campaign from the outside. I think they're doing a pretty good job. I've noticed that they're getting a whole bunch of VCs to post up stuff with their EU Inc. hat on, which is fantastic. And I think actually one thing that's worth mentioning is you don't just go to EU Inc.'s website and just fill out a form or something. They actually direct you to where you can give direct feedback to the EU on this proposal. So the more people from this ecosystem that go in there and do that, the better. I totally agree with Mads that, we need to unlock a lot of capital in Europe. I think one of the really disappointing things is that von der Leyen hasn't really done a good job of implementing the report. I saw that the FT published that only 11% of Draghi's recommendations were actually being implemented, and about 20% are on the way. So really, she needs to knuckle down. And I think, to be fair, obviously Ukraine and trade talks with the US have taken up a lot of time, but she needs like a crack unit on this in terms of implementation. They need to put some real resources behind it. But until they do that, they're just going to be dragging their feet.
Dragging their feet, loving it. Love some dad jokes. Bring them on. Andrew, what's your perspective? What would you add or challenge?
I think the crack unit is a good idea, but the problem is that crack unit would have to have some carte blanche from all the member states that it could ride roughshod over a bunch of other departments and part of the EU Commission in order to get things done, and it would need permission from those member states, and many of those member states might not give it. I don't know how you do it. Otherwise, how do you make things happen quick enough? But I think it was, you both touched on the core problem, which is that old chestnut, which is where's the capital? And when you've got 16 trillion, I think it says in pension fund assets, of which 0.02 or 3%, I think it was, goes into VC versus 1 to 2% in the US, which is relatively speaking about 100 times relatively more capital in the US. I mean, the numbers are staggering. So when we feed that back into the stuff that the All-In Conference is saying what's wrong with Europe, or indeed how you win, I don't know how you keep pace without that capital being available. And the EU and the UK needs to pull a much bigger lever, much harder to get that capital out of bonds and into the market. And the market will spend some of it well, and it will spend some of it badly, but it's just the numbers are just a gargantuan difference. And it's not that we don't have the money's just in the wrong place.
The European pension fund contributions are the highest on records, but as we've discussed before, it's still a microcosmic drop in the ocean. But it does feel like there is an opening of doors, at least. We've now surpassed, as far as European pension contributions into European venture, they've now surpassed 2019 figures, which was the previous high. So
you, Dan, were at the BBCA UK conference yesterday, right? And Rachel Reeves was up there saying, there's absolutely no reason why pension funds can't invest into VC now. They've got no excuse.
That was the one quote that I captured, yeah.
which ignores the small issue of fee caps and the practicality of actually making that happen. It's a bit of empty rhetoric.
It felt like she was saying to the crowd, well, I've done my bit. There's no excuse for them not to engage now. So watch this space. It's like, hang on a minute. What about some practical applications and some incentives? But I know that it was obviously she was at the BBCA, so she's going to be saying these things to this crowd. But I know that it's also part of the part of the dialogue that is going on. But Lomax, you've got some facts and figures. What would you point at here?
Well, no, I'm just just trying to step back. So looking, no one I think expected the implementation of the Draghi report to be done overnight. Like, this is the EU after all, and actually the progress that we've made with regard to the 400 or 383 recommendations, 12-15% actually, to be honest, sounds quite good for the EU, quite frankly. But if you think about what's happened since then, actually, clearly we know it's like negative. Like, the EU has signed an uneven trade deal with the US. Energy prices are still at record highs, and really the growth is anemic across the European bloc. However, I think, this stuff will take time. I mean, a lot of these changes that are being implemented, for example, in R&D, are going into what they call FP10, which is the next kind of cyclical R&D program of the EU. That's due to start in 2028. So this is kind of oil tanker type maneuverings. But I think, look, there are kind of small things that we can do. One thing Mads was talking interesting about, sort of galvanizing the private sector here. So I think in Europe, we don't have the culture of R&D spend, despite our great technical talent, universities, etc. If you look at the numbers, a percentage of GDP of R&D, Europe is way below where it should be. So Europe spends 2.2% of GDP on R&D. The US is more like 3.5%. Korea, which is an outlier, is more like 5.5%, right? So we are underinvesting across the private and the public sector in R&D. So if there are smart ways, now the public programs are going to receive more money, but it's going to be in this new program, which is, years away. Interestingly, looking into this, do you know how many days it takes from the green light that you've received a grant to the day you actually receive the cash? You know how many days it is? 240 days, Those kind of things, small things actually, could be dealt with quite quickly. But I think trying to think outside the box on this, I would encourage more companies. We're going to talk about ASML later, interestingly, in the Mistral deal. And this is a little bit tangential to that, which is, let's see more incentivization of private companies to invest in R&D rather than paying dividends. And, when I say private sector companies, they could still be publicly listed companies, but let's try and incentivize investment in R&D over share buybacks and dividends, for example. I think there are small things that you can do which move the needle at a big level, which is what the EU Inc. guys are really onto. So the EU Inc. guys are working on both a single company. Fine, that's interesting. But I think the more interesting work they're doing is around employee share incentivization. I think that is huge because unlike the US, where you have a very, very simple system where employees really can actually tie almost a monetary value to the options that they have, it makes it much easier to hire, incentivize people. I think in Europe, we have problems where, for example, you're taxed on the grant of an option, where you're paying income tax when you exercise your option, or income tax when you sell the shares that come from that option. If they can simplify and improve the tax treatment of, for example, employee share options, that is a huge breakthrough that could be achieved in relatively short order, because ultimately, like, what is building big companies in a short amount of time? It's hiring and incentivizing and finding the best talent you can, right?
Did you see, Lomax, that Germany have just passed the draft law? So it's not really in law yet, but they passed the draft law looking at founder tax implications and VC tax implications. So not only are they unlocking their manufacturing base very smartly, as we have discussed many times, but they are also now very actively, and it was pretty much unanimous straight in, to look at how they can incentivize founders and investors via the tax mechanism. There are naysayers looking at now that obviously the receipts shortfall that are going to come in years, whatever, 3, 5, 10. But I thought that was really smart, because normally we look at Germany as being quite slow at that kind of stuff, and they're on it.
Yeah, no, and I think you need to, for example, Norway, there's been a big debate about this recently, right? I mean, it's 35 million people, but clearly it's a very wealthy country. And Norway have had this issue where you would pay capital gains tax on unrealized, paper profits every year. So if you're a startup founder and your company's going from 10 to 50 to 100 to 500 million of value, you're paying tax every year on the paper gain. We've seen a bunch of the unicorn founders have actually, left the country as a result. That's been hugely political in Norway. But one slight issue we have here is that tax is a national competence. So, every single country has to fix their own tax regime, so it's, in a way, this isn't actually a Brussels solution. But I think if there is some unity there, that would be great. And then the final thing before I shut up is around skilled migration. If you actually, I was looking into it last night, UK net migration is up. So actually, it's kind of up. It's like, there's a guy saying it's the highest it's been since Henry VIII, which, okay, fine.
When it was 12.
Interesting data point. I mean, where he got his data from, I don't know. But the point is that actually, when you look into it, skilled migration, which is the thing that we all want, is actually down dramatically. So these guys, and I suspect that's the same across a lot of many of the countries in the EU. So that
is there not an American effect? Is there not an American? Obviously, we want more really smart Indians in here as an example, because I mean, what, 20% of the S&P, isn't it? Aren't the CEOs Indian or something crazy? But isn't there an American effect where
what you mean the academics are coming here? You mean, sorry,
yeah,
that
kind of R&D. That I wonder if there is almost like, not an anti-Trump, and I don't want to get Mads upset with me here, but almost like some kind of American reflective event where people go, okay, fine, I can't.
But that's because they don't care about the tax, because they've got the IRS. So, I mean, they're followed by the IRS wherever they go.
Yeah, they'll go everywhere. Right?
What we're not doing is taxing people proactively.
Don't forget, though, that if you're, a skilled migrant, i.e., you are someone who is capable of earning a lot of money, the salary that you could command in the EU versus in the US, so you're taking a sort of 70% haircut on your salary. So there's got to be you've got to really hate Trump and think that JD Vance is coming in next. You really think that that is set for the next 10 years for you to give up, your sort of golden ticket in the US, quite frankly. So I don't know. I mean, remember there was the French, what was it, University of Aix in Provence,
yes.
I don't know, 3 months ago, that was offering a few million. So that was academics, not actual, private.
The French made a big hullabaloo about some US academics who kind of flew over and landed on the tarmac like kind of refugees. But I think
they took them in, did they? Come on in.
Yeah, but I think there's it's almost like harking back to the 28th regime. We almost need an R&D 28th regime in a way as well, across the EU, which attracts R&D. And the other thing is also we need a bit more boosting up of, or maybe harmonization of how universities do university spin-outs, if you're talking about R&D. And a lot of universities in Europe still are very sort of fuddy-duddy about that. And
they're
their
getting
approach.
smarter, Mike. They're getting smarter.
That's one area where I actually have some optimism. The problem is that's also an oil tanker. So that's a kind of 10-year journey that we're on. But I anecdotally, that I see better terms across universities now. But I mean, it's changing very, very slowly. But I think, Nathan Benice from S Street has been doing a good job on this with, I think, spinout.xyz. And there's a bunch of other people beating the drum.
I was speaking to the Imperial team, who are in basically, the IP team Imperial, and they are now setting the tone for Cambridge and Oxford and other.
Well, they're great. Cambridge is great as well. Oxford's been the problem historically. Cambridge and Imperial have been great. I think those are the things we can also have influence over as VCs, though, because a whole bunch of times we said to founders, well, look, we'll be the bad cop. You go back and say you've got this lead investor, but they'll only invest if you only take 5% of the company. And more often than not, the university will capitulate on that. That's not the thing I'm worried about, because we have some control over it. And even the R&D I'm less worried about, because there is R&D money going out. It's the later stage. It's the growth. It's making sure that we don't do all the hard bit and then the company buggering off to the United States. And that's really all I care about, because every day that's what my portfolio companies struggle with. They can't raise the depth, the quantum of capital they need versus their US competitors. And we talk about it every month, but that is the problem. That's the problem I want solving.
We just need more though, Andrew, don't we? We just need more. Let's get more. Let's prove to LPs that there's more coming down the pipe. And there are more potential unicorns in the pipe now in Europe than we've ever seen before. And obviously we've seen a massive groundswell of really solid activity, and we are going to talk about ASML and Mistral in a second. So there are some more case studies, there's some more goodwill, there's some more awareness. I do believe that. But before we move on from EU Inc., Mads, you've been I know you just got off a very long red eye, but you've been surprisingly quiet. What else would you add? Is there anything else that you would add before we move on EU Inc., anything from the Mario Draghi stuff?
Well, I mean, I think goodwill and show us the money and all that stuff, I think is fine. I think we're planning on unpacking the ASML deal later, but it's just so connected with
Let's go now.
this.
Let's go for it. Let's do it.
It's so connected because we often say, well, we need to get a bit more money into venture. No, we need to get a lot more money into productive assets in general. The main criticism of ASML investing in Mistral is that investors felt that they should have those funds being paid out as dividends or share buybacks instead. And that is exactly the endemic issue we have. That's a reflection not of there not being enough venture capital necessarily, but of there not being enough equity invested in productive assets in general. Because when there isn't enough money, the money that's left has got this mentality of scarcity, and everybody just wants to see share buybacks and dividends instead of, what an amazing thing, we can make investments. Let's provide you with the capital to go and make stuff happen. So that's why I'm arguing it's not an isolated startup thing. It's all the way through the capital ladder. The whole stack needs fixing, and that's why we need pension reform.
ASML, they've led this $2 billion round into Mistral this week. What does it mean beyond the cash? Just to set some of the things that were on my mind, and then Andrew, I'm going to come to you next. So will this create stronger tech sovereignty for discussion, smarter AI hardware, software connectivity? Maybe. I was looking at it thinking, will this end up like that awkward Microsoft OpenAI pairing is there? But then Microsoft and Mistral already have an agreement, and NVIDIA is already an investor, I think. So I'm wondering how that's going to unpack. How will this work with the EU AI Act? They both, customer and supplier, they kind of sit on either side of the argument. So I don't know if there's any regulatory challenges to this, or are they both going to be massive lobbyists? I don't know, but they were the things that were on my mind, and that's a little bit of tee up. But Andrew, where were you going to go with this?
I was really going to say, I think it proves that European VCs are too small to compete. I mean, it's fantastic in the sense that if this opens up other European companies' balance sheet to invest, it contributes towards solving the capital problem at growth. But it's the deal's a bit of a canary in the coal mine for me, which is, if Europe doesn't fix its capital markets with regards to technology, then, this next generation of AI and deep tech will either just be bought by the US or will never scale at all. So fantastic news, good for AMSL. But I agree with Mads, and I think it's a function of there aren't enough VC funds in Europe that are managing 20, 30, 40 billion.
But I love the fact, this isn't ASML's first trip to the circus. They've been doing a bunch of M&A back 15 odd years, and they did, was it $1 billion or something into Zeiss? I know they've done a bunch. This isn't their first rodeo. But Mike, I know you've got some thoughts on this. Where would you take this?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Zeiss, because in that instance, it was about the optic technology that Zeiss had that helped to go into ASML's machines, which then go on to make chips, of course. And so, but I don't think that we need to get too concerned about it. Well, I don't see any regulatory issues happening here, because they're very different, obviously very different businesses. Strategically for ASML, this is actually a brilliant deal. These guys are just down the road in Paris from the Netherlands. Culturally, there's a fit. I was actually talking to a couple of sources in the investment community about this, who were quite close to the deal, and they were just saying that the culture fit is great. The strategic fit is great, especially for ASML. And also, of course, Mistral gets its independence, and it's not quite the same as when OpenAI did the deal with Microsoft. That was a very much of a kind of, two bedfellows having to kind of get along, the odd couple. And ASML is quite far away from, the GPU world as well, in terms of, it's not, Mistral isn't going to be putting $1 billion into ASML's chips because they don't make them. So they just make the machines. So I think it's actually a really good deal all around. But I think Andrew's got a very good point that this wasn't a kind of a European version of Sequoia or A16Z investing $1 billion. It was a, very large European corporate. I'd like to see more of them if that was possible. But yet there still remains this issue.
Yeah, if you try and unpack the deal a bit, I completely agree with you, Mike. Mistral is now, I think they've surpassed 100 million euros in recurring revenue. So at the valuation that's discussed here, but I think this is going to be like 14 times recurring revenue.
It's 11.3 billion, I think, valuation.
Way lower than the US. That's the other thing to point out. Way lower than the multiple would have been in the US.
it's a fraction. You look at the valuation multiples on Anthropic and OpenAI are much higher. You have a lot of real world use cases now. I think BNP, they've got more than 800 AI use cases in production from Mistral. So, there's a lot of, it's a good business, it's growing fast. They're, creating real value from an application perspective. And it looks like ASML will get that too. So, but completely agree. It's a symptom of the European venture ecosystem just not being able to write checks that size. And let's face it, 1.3 billion euros sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things when, Anthropic is raising $13 billion rounds.
From Mistral's point of view, it's a no-brainer. Like, these people wrote a very, very big check into the company, and clearly they would have tried to tap the VC markets and had limited success. I was a bit surprised by that. They've got Lightspeed. Lightspeed have been there from early stages, and they have a lot of capital. But from ASML, I have been trying to think why would they do this? Actually, this is quite a big check for them. What's the strategic relevance? I don't probably think we all are party to the precise internal strategic rationale there, but ASML is a one-trick pony, and they know that. They have a 90%, basically monopoly on what they do, but that ain't gonna be there forever. And actually, I was just thinking about this. Look at Illumina. Illumina had a 90% market share in next generation sequencing, right? 80 billion market cap company. Now they're losing their monopoly. They're down at 15 billion market cap. In a way, like, if I was at ASML, I would have looked at what happened to Illumina, and I'd be thinking the same thing. This could happen to us. Andrew invests a lot in sort of next generation compute, future of compute, for example. What happens if we move beyond silicon? What happens if we move to stacking? What happens if the EUV becomes less relevant in the future? What happens if AI actually absorbs less compute than we thought, which means we sell fewer machines? I would also suggest that there probably is the hand of Brussels in this somewhere. And I'll tell you why. Because there are, I think, 5,000 independent suppliers that supply ASML dotted around Germany, Benelux, France, right? All of those, that's tens of thousands of jobs that rely on ASML being a dominant position, right? And actually, if ASML starts to lose its crown, actually politically, that's really, really dangerous for the EU, right? And so I think there's a kind of, okay, this doesn't solve ASML's risk of losing its monopolistic position, but I think it gives ASML a kind of slightly deeper view as to what's happening at the model level, gives it maybe a little bit more soft power and positioning around the world when it comes to AI. And I think it's great, as Mike says, to see this kind of, normally we see the Europeans kind of getting quite protective individually within the EU, which is the whole problem. Actually, it's good to see some collaboration between two of the bigger member states economically. But I was just trying to work out why ASML would write this check. I mean, it's not as if they print 8 billion a year, right? Which is a lot, but it's also this is a big check for them to write. When also, they print 8 billion a year, but they have huge capex internally and constantly trying to stay ahead of the game. So it's not like they couldn't have just carried on spending and investing in the future of their machines,
I think they're going to get some applications that will help them directly improve the performance around maintenance, around kind of the design of next-gen processes. So I think they'll get a lot of real-world AI expertise that they can use directly to optimize.
I just want to jump in on that. Don't you think that, they could have just licensed some software. They don't have to spend a check this big, and take an equity stake to get access to this.
They've got very operationally involved. If you look behind the scenes, there's some cross-fertilization of people
But if
happening.
ASML want to use more AI, and it's like any manufacturing company wants to use more software and AI in its development processes, they don't have to go and take a large equity stake in a supplier, they can just license it,
In many ways, nobody has to do anything, but it's probably a great deal too. That's the point I was making before. 14 times revenue at this growth rate, that's great. Next year, they continue to grow at this rate, it's going to be 5 to 7 times revenue. That's a really good investment. And you get somebody on the board, and you have a direct line through to the CEO. You get to shape the future of the company. So this is the difference in my view, between European mentality and US mentality, which is always, we look at this mentality of scarcity. Oh, we could, all this other stuff we could do with the money, blah, 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 blah. Listen, this is a good deal that you create a lot of value for them. Let's go for it.
I agree with Mads, and I think if you've got the founder of a LLM, not just an LLM, but frontier open source as well as proprietary, deep generative AI on speed dial when you're trying to accelerate the capabilities of your manufacturing processes. God knows what. I mean, the sky's the limit. Yeah, that person is on speed dial, and that they're not just licensing something, not just in a queue. They're down the road and on speed dial.
I agree. My point was I'm trying to work out why the hell would ASML do this, and I think that's the reason. They need to be rings because they are at risk. They are this one-trick pony. They are at risk of having their monopoly broken at some point. They need to be ringside for what's coming down the pipe, and this is the price for that. And it's fine. Okay, Mads, I don't like. Okay, yeah, it may be I don't think anyone on the board of ASML is thinking this is a great, multiple arbitrage kind of deal, because that's not how these companies, I don't think, and maybe fine, that may be a byproduct of the transaction. But I think it's that. I think it's, and actually, this is actually refreshing because you wouldn't see normally Europeans thinking like this. Probably, actually, Matt, they would be thinking in hardcore terms of pure ROI. This is more strategic. Let's build together. Probably what, in the US, when you had one big company ring up another being like, let's do something together, man. They would say, and they would write a $1 billion check into something that's non-core. That kind of shit happened the whole time in Silicon Valley. Good to see that happening on kind of big scale in Europe.
I think Lomax's point is right, that they're a one-trick pony in the sense that they produce, the most advanced machines in the world. And if you lose that, if you no longer produce the most advanced machines in the world because someone overtakes you, then that's what underpins your monopoly. So spending $1 billion to be, at the forefront, to have the ear of the CEO, to understand what's going on is not a lot of money in order to underpin your entire business and reduce risk. The more interesting question for me is whether it is just that, or whether they are thinking sort of more strategically about diversifying the business. And this is a first step, towards that. And what I love about the biggest American companies is, Amazon becoming a data center and infrastructure company, and SpaceX becoming a provider of global internet. That ambition level and that willingness to roll the dice again and again and go to new markets is, I think, what makes the biggest companies in the world stay big and more dominant. And I'd love to see some more of that ambition from some of these big corporates in Europe that have very large balance sheets and could just risk some of that capital. Like, go out there and, you've done it once, spend.
I think it's great. I think it's a great thing. And Europe on Europe, bring it on. Mike, anything else? I know you've looked at this deal quite closely. Anything else from you? Any dirty secrets we can share?
Well, I'm going to be putting up a column about it, but on my socials. But I just want to sort of echo. I think it is a sort of a strategic deal. It's getting that direct line to the frontier models. I wouldn't read too much into this sovereignty aspect, and that's something that I certainly was quite interested in. Was there conversations at a Brussels level? Come on, guys, smash your heads together. Let's get these guys show on the road. But I'm not even sure anyone's really tuned in enough to know what's going on at that level. But the sovereignty aspect, I think, is interesting, but I think it's a culture thing as well, because I think, like I said, these guys, they're up the road in the Netherlands, Paris is down the road. And I think if Mistral had looked at a similar kind of deal, and probably people were knocking on their door in the US, I think the culture fit might not have suited them quite as well. And I think that's probably one of that's certainly the feedback that I've got from my sources, is that culture fit was a big piece of the decision making.
Well, we will definitely look out for your column. So please give us the link and we'll put that in the comments of the pod. I want to shift gears a bit into defense. So we've seen this week, we saw obviously Doha being bombed. We've seen the drones coming in from Russia into Poland on purpose, not on purpose. We don't know. I don't know how they can't be on purpose, but we'll wait and see how that pans out. So, but it just feels like a few lines have been crossed, and defense still very heavily on everyone's minds across Europe. Now, in the UK, the government has pledged to lift defense spending to 2.5% of GDP by 27, and there's a promissory note to get that to 3% in another 3 years. We'll see if that happens. As part of that plan, this week, 250 million has been committed to 5 local economies basically outside of London and the Southeast to invest in defense, dual use, and the industrial side, this resilience piece. Prioritizing British and UK-based defense firms, and all about developing regional defense partnerships between government and these other areas of the UK. So feels sensible. There's a slight possible, shoving this money out into the regions. Feels like there's obviously a political angle. But Mads, where would you take this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the big context shift is you've got kind of the first NATO engagement with Russian assets, right? That sort of changes everything. And we saw Poland was quick to invoke Article 4. That means there's a kind of consultation between the NATO members. That means there's an urgency across the alliance. And I think, UK strategically has taken the right direction, but events are somehow overtaking the planning speed. So this is probably something we're going to discuss, is whether, how can we move faster here? Because it's clear we've been talking about Russia for, many years now, and there is movement, but are we moving fast enough to really step up and counter the threat we're seeing?
So on the UK side, where would you take that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some money being put into strategic hubs. It's probably fine. It looks like it's relatively small fry still. 250 million does not get me.
I'm hearing not excited.
I mean, I think one of the questions you asked is, how do startups engage, right? Can they? Does it make sense? My sense is, listen, if you're not already engaged, probably not, I would say intuitively. Then again, look, there is a massive need for improvement in manufacturing, in supply chain. If you have cool tech in that space, there might be dual use applications. So in that sense, you should partner with folks and companies that are already operating in the space. Very
quickly on that one, Mads. This first T50 is the initial unlock of or someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 2 billion pledged in total. So there's more pots of capital to come for more investment across the MOD and government departments, where there may be more opportunities for startups to engage for discussion.
No, I mean, look, it's good, right? We just need more.
Comes down to how real do you think the threat of having to go to war is, as to how urgent you think the problem is. But as we talked about before, the ability to wage war is not just whether you have enough tanks, but it's your industrial base, it's your capacity to spin up and build and ensure your supply chains are resilient and you've got access. And there are so many holes in the European setup and the UK setup at the moment. I think there's one factory in Europe that produces all the TNT. What happens if that factory gets, blown to pieces? You have no more TNT. And so this is about, I read this as a sort of hat tip towards trying to accelerate industrial capacity, which we don't really have compared to, the late 30s, where we were able to spin up a warfighting machine because we had a civilian shipbuilding industry we could repurpose. We had the factories, and we just don't have those anymore. So
we've got more ships being built, Andrew, but we have. I mean, the Danes and the Norwegians are now throwing things into Scotland and up north, aren't they? Your fellow kin.
China can build like 40 major ships a month or something. It's insane. It outstrips all the other world's capacity combined to build shipping. So I think it's positive because it underpins, those regional industries. Will it result in 50,000 jobs by 2035? I don't really know or care. I care about, will contracts follow from government to support these industries? And I care about, will that result in capacity for our industrial base and for our military, which is going to be a big enough stick that, bad actors think twice. So it's all good, but the budget, even the budget increase is up to 3% and beyond. A lot of these increases will only pay for what we've already committed to. People forget that. They think it's new cash coming in. The budgets are all so out of whack, then actually a lot of this money coming in will simply pay for what was committed to the capacity years ago. We're not even into surplus yet.
So definitely some pork barreling in this report. There's definitely just like shifting money around the country to curry favor in different regions. And the numbers are very small. 250 million out of 55 billion total annual budget is a drop in the ocean. If you're a startup, this report tells me that the UK is just still, despite all of the lip service that people are paying to innovation, defense, and a high degree of speed, I think the UK is still very slow. So I think you need to go to the hair on fire problem, which is the Eastern Front, effectively. And look what's happening in Poland. I mean, their defense is defense spending and as a percentage of GDP is way higher than ours. They are actually,
and probably up after this week.
look, I mean, if you look at anecdotes that I've had from founders in Poland negotiating through procurement cycles, everything, they are literally cutting all of the procurement channels now just to buy stuff. Yeah, that's not happening in the UK, right? So that's happening because it's a real hair on fire problem, unfortunately. And so, you know, this kind of ipso facto, like defense budgets are going to triple, quadruple over the next 5-6 years. Therefore, it's a great place to build a startup. Like, be careful. You know, I mean, you look at the companies that have the sort of relatively new non-prime companies in the UK that have won big defense contracts. Palantir, yeah, like clearly well funded. I mean, that's a 22-year-old company, right? But like, it's not exactly a startup. And Tequiva, you know, which is a Portuguese company down the road from me in Lisbon, which won a large contract with the RAF. They're buying an airport in Wales now. That's actually quite a good story. They're investing £400 million locally. Tequiva is a 20-year-old company. It's a startup, you know. It got like a series something B round.
When is
or
a
C
startup
round.
not a startup?
When it's not growing super fast anymore. I think that the procurement stuff, Lomax, you picked on. I mean, I think there have been improvements. To be fair to British procurement side, it's not where it should be, but it's getting better. But there are some other sort of challenges which are cultural within, you know, how they, not just the speed at which you procure, but what you procure and what the military want. And one of the reasons that the military like buying big ticket items like ships and expensive aircraft is because it's quite hard to slice and dice those projects. So once they're sort of, it's proved that you spend billions of pounds on a ship, the chances that if you bid, you say you need 6 ships, then even if a new government comes in and slices the budget, you'll probably end up with 4. If you need 1,000 drones to protect airspace, or you need 1,000 attack drones or 10,000 drones even, it's not much help if actually a government comes in and cuts that down to like suddenly 500 drones. You know, it's very easy to get slice and dice. When you have a lot of something which is low cost, it tends to get, you know, chopped in half and then drawn and quartered again. And so actually there are some fundamental issues around how we need to rebuild our military capability with a lot of things that are cheap, which go against the entire sort of heritage of how you buy stuff because of the fear of the politicians coming in and just, you know, slashing the budgets in half. You end up with a capability that doesn't have efficacy. It won't work.
Well, I mean, you talked about Palantir, but we've got Helsing trying to be a kind of Anduril of Europe, you know, but producing drones, battlefields, AI, various kinds of things. And I think that they just recently made an announcement with a partnership around something technical to do with battlefields, you know, logistics and what have you. So there's all those kinds of deals going on at that kind of level. At the startup level, I mean, when I give a shout out to my friends over at the Resilience Conference in that's going to be happening in October, I think under the hood, there's quite a lot happening that doesn't get talked about, that doesn't see the light of day. And it is probably going to be at these smaller levels, like, you know, drone testing with Techover and pilots with small technology providers. I still think, though, that I think is it Ian Clark in the 1970s said that effectively the militaries should always be in R&D until there's an actual war, and then suddenly you've got the up-to-date stuff. But until then, stay in R&D, and that's kind of where we are, especially in dual use. And dual use has got legs because you can sell into the civilian market, and you can take a longer timelines into selling into primes or military. But I think there needs to be a real policy initiative around primes and just hammering them down to just saying, like, let's buy from smaller companies, let's buy faster, let's do more R&D, and then much more of like a policy approach, a legislative approach to like smash the primes up a bit, or beat them around the head and get them to buy from the smaller providers. Like Andrew's invested in a very interesting startup that does engines, for instance, for drones and things. So, you know, I think there needs to be a lot more of that going on as well.
So here's some other things that were on my mind this week. Not all Euro focused, but I thought some of them were interesting, so I'm going to put them in the pot. Anyway, Larry Ellison of Oracle fame became the richest man in the world for a few seconds, beating Elon Musk. And there are some very good reasons behind that. I don't know if anyone wants to chime in on that. We saw Klarna's IPO. At time of press, did really well, and it's since kind of quietened down a little bit. But I think the Klarna IPO was pretty solid. We've talked about the German cabinet changing the tax rules for founders and VCs. Don't know the exacts on that yet, but I thought that was a really cool, interesting thing. Who's buying a skinny iPhone? I have no idea who that market is. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that or anything else on your minds. So, Mads, I'll start with you. Anything in there to pick up on or anything else you would like to talk about this week?
Look, the Klarna IPO finally happened.
Yeah.
And that's great,
bad.
right?
It wasn't bad.
Listen.
Oh.
So, yes, sure, it's down a lot from the peak. I think the peak valuation was $46 billion, and it's down to, what, 15 billion now. But it's raised money. It's oversubscribed. Revenue is still growing, although it looks like they're losing money, which I can't quite work out how they can still be. But anyway, I mean, I think the lesson there, I think, is it's better to IPO at a realistic valuation than to wait forever. And I think this is one more great company that's through the IPO gates, right? And it'll help distribute some liquidity back to LPs and sort of, stimulate the recycling of capital into the next generation of startups. So overall, I think
I spoke to a Sequoia partner today, and they said they were very happy with the result.
Well, Sequoia made, I think, $3.5 billion on a 500 million check, right? So,
Yeah, exactly,
or 5 million series of checks. Atomico actually were reasonably big winners. If you want to, highlight a European success, they invested, I think, 12 million, and I think their total holdings now 150. So 10x 12. It is over 13 years. It's quite long, but it's not a bad result.
Standard for Europe, though, baby.
Well, anyone, it takes a long time to build a big company, but yeah. We talked about it earlier this year. Klarna missed the window. Remember, they filed their S1, and then we had Liberation Day or whatever, tariffs, etc., and the markets tanked, and Klarna missed it. But actually, it's probably a good thing they missed it because they actually came back in a more robust environment, and it actually performed very well. So let's see.
Mike, anything in there you would have an opinion on, or anything else that you'd like to discuss before we vamoosh?
Well,
Come on, Mike,
Klarna,
give us a scoop. Give us a scoop.
Give us a scoop.
Well, I'm slightly out of day-to-day news production at the moment, but I'll let you know when I'm back in. But I thought it was really interesting how it created a lot of millionaires. I think I was noticed that co-founder Victor Jacobson, who left in 2012, cashed out 3.5% of his $1.6 billion holding. Chief product officer became a millionaire. Chief operations officer. So we're going to see a bunch of angels. We're going to see a Klarna mafia basically come out of this.
Recycling, baby.
Yeah, and so the Klarna mafia will go into the ecosystem, and long may they reign. That would be interesting to see what they do next.
Andrew, anything else from my list or anything else on your mind before we go?
There's a big microprocessor electronics show at XL, which I won't be going to, but it's nice to see it happen.
That sounds very sexy.
Jesus. Because
how to drag the room down.
We can't end on that note, but what we should end on is quantum. Oh my word, quantum is pumping at the moment,
again?
Right? Yeah,
Okay,
no, not again. It wasn't
3 massive deals.
PsiQuantum had just come out and announced a $1 billion raise. Now, PsiQuantum, which came out of Bristol, let's not forget. I mean, it's kind of billed as a US company, but originally the academics were based in Bristol, so it's really a kind of
we'll take it.
Yeah, a UK origin project. And so $7 billion valuation. We talked about Quantinium 2 weeks ago. Quantinium also originally out of Cambridge, right? So actually, Europe is playing a material role within this quantum boom at the moment. And there's a general feeling amongst the investor community that we are getting closer to really useful quantum computers. I mean, the market certainly thinks that. IonQ is now trading at 13 billion.
Lomax, would you say that Europe's got a lead in quantum over the US?
No.
We've got a chance of winning, but we're gonna have more money is gonna have to come from somewhere.
Look at this. So IonQ US 13 billion. Quantinium now has become a US project, 10 billion. PsiQuantum 7 billion. IQM out of Finland just raised, at a, I don't know, 1 billion valuation. And Mike, Oxford Ionics, right, which sold 4 months ago out of Oxford, obviously, to IonQ at a 1 billion valuation. It's funny how in Europe now we talk about all these exits, 1 billion, 2 billion, these valuations and these fundraisings. Like these numbers we would have been like hitting the roof about, a few years ago. So it is all kind of all really exciting stuff. But, Oxford Ionics selling to a US company is not great. But we have got amazing talent in Europe. But it is probably an area, to answer your question, Mike, where I think we have relative parity I mean, Andrew maybe is more bullish and thinks we'll win. I don't know if you regard quantum as a winner-takes-all market, but certainly Europe has parity technologically with the US.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, I'm gonna call a day there and just say I love the fact that we ended on an upside. Thank you so much, Lomax, for bringing that, and always rely on you for not being a Debbie Downer. Loving it, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a gift, and
Thanks
we'll
very
catch you all
much.
next week.
Great to see you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.
Upside.